Good Shabbos, and welcome to another video of Devar Torah. Today is Shushan Purim, the special day where they observe Purim in Jerusalem. But this morning, the Jewish world received news of the passing of a very important rabbi, Rabbi Shmariyahu Yosef Chaim Kanievsky. Most of the world knew him as Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky. And I want to put him into a little bit of context because he's not really a household name for most of our community. Rabbi Kanievsky was the son of a very important member of the first family of Haredi Judaism in Israel, of the Torah community, the Lithuanian Torah community. His father was known as the Stipler Gaon, and his uncle was the Rabbi Yeshayahu Horowitz, who was also known as the Chazon Ish, known after the books that he wrote and the title of the books that he wrote. What's so significant about this family is that they essentially came to Israel with the recognition that after the Shoah, after the Holocaust, the vast majority of the Torah community in places like Poland, Lithuania, and Ukraine were wiped out entirely. And there was a fear that the great scholarship that has been our tradition and that blossomed in Europe would disappear. And the Chazon Ish, Rabbi Kanievsky's uncle, essentially made a pact with Ben Gurion that allowed for the exemption from the army for Torah scholars. And this essentially gave rise to an enormous blossoming of Torah in the land of Israel, one which is really unparalleled elsewhere in Jewish history. There are more great scholars today in Torah than there ever have been in the history of the Jewish people, and to a large extent it is this family, Rabbi Horowitz, the Stipler Gaon, and Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, who have very much been at the spearhead of this movement. Rabbi Kanievsky was a Torah scholar who dedicated himself 17, 18 hours a day to the study of Torah, and I just want to show you something very interesting about him, and that is a letter that was penned by none other than Shaul Lieberman. Shaul Lieberman is essentially maybe one of the great lights of the conservative movement, and Rabbi Lieberman also was a great scholar on his own, writing an important work called the Tosefta Kipshuta, which elucidates a manuscript or a text which is very important, is parallel to the Mishnah. But he writes as follows. He says, I would like to recommend Rabbi Chani Kanievsky of Bnei Brak for the Rothschild Prize. He published half a dozen books, one of them, Sources on Maimonides, which is published separately and has now been included in the editions of Maimonides. So that means that his notes on Maimonides are so important that they've become part of the standard edition. And then his notes on the minor tractates have no parallel. He is known only among a small circle of scholars since his books were published anonymously. I consider him superior to his father, the Stipler. This is quite a significant recommendation, and it also reflects something else that Rabbi Kanievsky was known for, which is his humility. And he was a great Torah scholar. He would take people for audiences all the time. He was famous for giving them a blessing by saying buha, which is just a short version of bracha v'hatzlacha. And he would do that in the midst of his learning, and really throngs of people would come to him for a blessing. Just share with you a couple of pieces of Torah that Rabbi Kanievsky taught. He was someone who was very, very knowledgeable. He's almost like a rabbi's rabbi. We may know in our community somebody like a Rabbi Sachs much better, because Rabbi Sachs was sort of about big ideas. Rabbi Kanievsky was about connecting the dots on the fine points of Torah, knowing the sources backwards and forwards. So just as an example, Pesach is coming up, and one of the things that he taught is when you look at the song, the simanim, the order of the Seder, it's Kadesh Orchat Karpas Yachatz. So Only Orchatz has this idea of the vav, the connecting. Why is it not, you know, vikarpas, virachza, vimotzimatza, vimagid, right? Why do we not add a vav to any of those other things? And he says that it's about the idea of wanting to connect the kiddush, the blessing of the kiddush, to the meal. They can't be separate. You have to make your kiddush in a place where you're going to eat your meal. And so, in order to keep that intimate connection, it has the word orchatz. This is a halachic detail. Those kinds of details are the kinds of things that Rabbi Kanievsky was very known for. While we're on the subject of Pesach, interestingly, he was asked about the use of medical marijuana on Pesach. Is that going to be considered kitniot, or one of those species of not exactly grain that we're not allowed to use on Passover? And Rabbi Kanievsky said, for medical use, if it is not prohibited by the laws of the land, it would be kosher for Passover. He was in many ways considered the last word on many halachic subjects, and his passing is a great loss for the Jewish people, and I figured I would share that with you in this week's video, Devar Torah.